It's a 1-hour Newsmaker show. Today we just heard from North Hornell Mayor John Fauci. Now switching over to Alfred University history professor Dr. Gary Ostrower. Good morning, Dr. Ostrower.
Good morning to you, Brian.
Dr. Ostrower, one of the big stories in the news is Boris Johnson. Do you have any thoughts on how this will affect British politics if Johnson got so sick he couldn't keep going or, God forbid, died?
I really don't, in the sense that his successor will be Dominic Raab. He is the foreign secretary right now, but he's only been foreign secretary for about 2 months, just 2.5 months, and I really don't know very much about him. I do believe that he is very much on line with Boris Johnson in respect to the whole Brexit issue, in respect to immigration from other areas of Europe and whatnot. So my hunch is that there will not be very much change, at least not initially. And I also believe, and I'm not, again, I put some little question mark about this, that he is a kind of an abrasive individual. A lot of his fellow conservatives really don't like him very much. However, he's gotten to be foreign secretary, and he's obviously got something on the ball. Apparently, he's a bright guy. How this is going to ultimately affect British politics, I don't know. But, one has to hope that Johnson's going to be okay. Most people who get COVID-19 survive. About 98% of them, at least who are tested for COVID-19, are going to survive. So my hunch is that, Johnson will be around. I did hear that he was not put onto a ventilator, and I think that's good news. On the other hand, I think that his not just his hospitalization, but the fact that he's now in intensive care kind of underscores the degree to which this is a very, very serious thing that we're undergoing right now. And I really, if I can just kind of connect this to something local, I was listening to John Fauci, the mayor of North Hornell, talking just a few minutes ago on Newsmaker about the seriousness of the situation here. You asked him the question. There are some people who are kind of downplaying this, saying that, look, more people die from seasonal flu than they have from the COVID-19 epidemic, and that may be true. But that shouldn't mean that first of all, we don't know how many people eventually are going to die from COVID-19. And secondly, whether we're talking about the seasonal flu or we're talking about cancer deaths or cardiac-related deaths in the United States in any given year, none of these things comes close to COVID-19 in respect to the threat to our entire medical system. This thing could bring down hospitals, and it can ultimately overwhelm the ability of our medical system right now to treat all of these other kind of routine issues. So I think that Fauci is absolutely right in underscoring the importance of social distancing, of underscoring the importance of wearing masks when you are out in public. However much the president may have minimized this whole issue, may have downplayed the importance of COVID-19 until about 3 weeks ago or 2 weeks ago, we better take it very, very seriously.
Dr. Gary Ostrower, do you catch the Trump press conferences and do you check the Cuomo press conferences?
Well, I haven't seen much of the Cuomo because I've been doing work online teaching during the day. I have watched quite a number of the Trump press conferences, and I am struck by the degree to which number one, the president tries to dominate, in a sense, everything there. Yeah, he has a cast of other characters, including, of course, Dr. Fauci and Deborah Birx, both of whom I think are very, very good, really, really good scientists, really good doctors. But I guess it was on Sunday evening, and I thought this was kind of, I don't know, I'd almost say representative of what's happening right now. A reporter asked Dr. Fauci about issues having to do with testing and having to do with the ability to supply hospitals with the needs that they have, having to do with ventilators, having to do with respirators, having to do with personal protective equipment. They call it PPE, and what the reporter was essentially asking, which is a very, very legitimate question, was has the federal government the ability, and has it been doing enough in respect to providing aid in these areas? The question was directed at Dr. Fauci. President Trump stood up, he was already standing, but he stands there, he kind of takes a step forward, and he does not allow Dr. Fauci to answer the question. He says something to the effect of, this question has been asked before, 15 times before. And when the reporter says, look, I'm trying to ask this of, your medical specialist, of Dr. Fauci, Trump again simply dismissed the question and refused to allow Fauci to respond. Now, I think that, in some ways, is, I said, representative of these press briefings. I think these press briefings contain a lot of information from the president that is simply not true. Secondly, I think these press briefings provide a lot of praise of the president by other individuals who are there, whether they are corporation heads or whether they are government officials, even like Fauci himself, or, for instance, the vice president telling us what a great job Trump is doing. The president needs this. I think that the president suffers from, and I'm not going to say anything that you haven't heard before on Newsmaker right now, he suffers from something called narcissistic personality disorder. And you don't have to be a licensed psychologist, a PhD psychologist, to understand what this is. It's a disorder. It is a mental disorder. It involves an exaggerated sense of one's own importance. It involves, often as symptoms, an unwillingness to accept criticism. It involves an unwillingness to allow others to share in the spotlight that you crave for yourself. It involves a lack of empathy for other people. It involves a willingness to demean other people. And President Trump does this continually. I think we saw it yesterday, for instance, in his press conference, when a reporter from Fox News, from Fox of all places, when a reporter from Fox News asked, again, a question about the availability of testing, because the president says everyone who needs a test can get one, and, of course, everyone who needs a test cannot get one right now. It was a perfectly legitimate question that this fellow asked. And Trump attacks him. He calls it a stupid question. He says as a reporter that you're a third-rate reporter. Brian, we've never seen anything like this from a president. There is no reason to say that sort of thing. And to, when you ask then why is the president saying it, I'm afraid it has a lot more to do, not with the question that was asked or the skill of the reporter. It has a lot to do with, the president's mental, to his mental state. He simply cannot accept anything that, a question in this case, that even implies criticism of his own administration. I think it's a sad commentary on where we are politically right now.
One of the names that came up in the press conference last night was Navy Captain Brett Crozier. Is that how I say it?
Yeah, it is. And before I talk about Captain Crozier, let me just say something about the Cuomo side of this. As I said, I really haven't been watching his press conferences.
Yeah, we interrupt regular programming for both Governor Andrew Cuomo and President Donald Trump every day. We do get some complaints. We are sorry to irritate the regular listeners of these shows. It's just that this is an emergency situation and a lot of important things come out of it. For example, Governor Andrew Cuomo was going to have the National Guard come around and pick up a certain amount of ventilators from upstate hospitals. And that's one of the reasons we break in for a lot of the recent press conferences to see what the latest is on that. Go ahead with your thoughts. Sorry to interrupt, Dr. Ostrower.
There is no one who has, in a sense, equaled President Trump in respect to his ability to to control, if you will, to dominate, to meet President Trump on his own terms in respect to press conferences. Whatever else you can say about Trump, he is, I think, a brilliant tactician in terms of his use of TV. He has had a lot of experience as a TV talk show host and so forth, as a reality show host. And he uses it he has used it very, very well. And I think it's one of the reasons why he wound up winning the election in 2016. We haven't seen anyone come close to, I think, his quality, so to speak, as in terms of dominating TV, than Andrew Cuomo. I mean, Cuomo is a street fighter. He's a guy from Queens, the same place that Trump comes from. He's very, very well informed. He has a lot of political experience. He's been around the federal government as well as the state government. He's the first guy that we have seen, I think, to be able to take Trump on Trump's own terms. I found very interesting, just a couple days ago, really yesterday, I guess, there was a Rasmussen poll that asked about support among Democrats for a presidential candidate. 38% of the Democrats who were questioned indicated that they supported Biden. 38%, exactly the same percentage, indicated that they supported Cuomo. And yet if that same poll had been taken, let's say 3 or 4 months ago, Cuomo would probably have gotten maybe 1 or 2%. In other words, he was out of the running. He was really out of the picture entirely. Well, he's not out of the picture any longer. And while I think, Joe Biden is almost certainly going to get the Democratic nomination, I mean, he's well on his way to doing that. It's not a sure thing. I mean, what happens, one might ask, if former Vice President Biden comes down with the coronavirus? Well, if that happens, I would predict that it's not going to be Bernie Sanders who's going to benefit. It's going to be Andrew Cuomo. So I think that what you're talking about, the question you pose about the Cuomo press conferences is important. I think it's really given him a platform. It's given him a degree of visibility that none of us could have predicted just a couple of months ago.
Yes, Cuomo is definitely the rising star in the Democratic Party at the moment. Dr. Ostrower, why did Mario Cuomo, who made a big sensation in, what was it, the 1980 Democratic Convention, with a speech there about, was it 1980 or 84? Anyways, why did Mario Cuomo not pursue higher ambitions and run for the White House?
We're never going to fully know the answer to that question unless he had spoken candidly to members of his family who may someday, in memoirs that they write, spell this out. We simply don't know. What we do know is that he was very tempted to run. We do know that he was very indecisive about running. I'm talking about in the campaign of 1992. And eventually he decided that he was not going to make the run, probably because he assumed that the then sitting president, I'm talking about George H.W. Bush, was going to win the election. That was especially after the Gulf War, when Bush seemed to be very, very popular. Whatever one can say about Cuomo, he dithered. He was indecisive, as I say, and his time passed. So far as his son is concerned, crises often bring out the best of us, and they bring out the worst of us. And in the case of Andrew Cuomo, I think it has brought out the best in him. We've seen a part of him that is, I think, that has shocked all of us. I have not certainly been much of a fan of Andrew Cuomo. I think that in some ways he's, somewhat arrogant. I think that he's somewhat brusque. But he seems to really have his head screwed on right when it comes to COVID-19. So if you want to talk about Captain Crozier, I would love to do that. I think that that's an important story.
Can we do that? Can we take a quick break and then talk about the captain?
You're on.
All right, we'll be right back with Dr. Gary Ostrower. Stay with us.
Giovanni's and the Giovanellos want to thank their customers for 40 years of patronage. Here's a message from Giovanni's Restaurant on Seneca Street in Hornell. From now on, Giovanni's is only taking credit card orders from those who call ahead. Giovanni's follows the most stringent practices for cleaning, wearing masks and gloves, and social distancing. Out of a further abundance of caution, Giovanni's is no longer doing walk-ins, only deliveries and curbside pickups. Giovanni's will closely monitor CDC guidelines and will only modify their new rules when it becomes appropriate to do so. Again, Giovanni's thanks their loyal customers for 40 years of patronage.
Checking in now with meteorologist Rob Carroll. And
good news is it was mild and sunny yesterday, and if you look at the number of cases, southern hemisphere, they aren't as high as the northern hemisphere. Our hope is that the warm weather is going to help with this virus a little later in the season, and the warmer we get, the better that's going to be. Nice start to the morning. We've got sunshine, but as the day goes on, Brian, we'll notice clouds increasing from the northwest. There's a storm in Minnesota this morning that's headed our way. We're up to 60 or 65 today. Sunrise this morning was at 6:40. The sun sets tonight at 7:44. It's giving us over 13 hours of day length now. We'll see clouds tonight as that storm heads our way. Some rain will develop. We're 45 to 50. Rain tapers off to scattered showers, comes to an end by midday tomorrow. We're 55 to 60. More rain tomorrow night. That'll move in late. Second storm headed our way, 35 to 40. That storm will produce rainy, windy conditions on Thursday. We're 50 to 55. Then, Brian, we look a little unsettled for Friday with leftover clouds, scattered showers, and highs only in the 40.
thank you, Rob. Back with Dr. Gary Ostrower. Dr. Ostrower, Captain Brett Crozier. He apparently sent a letter to 20 or 30 people in the Navy, but it was on a non-secure, unclassified email. I guess it was about, what, COVID-19?
It certainly was about COVID-19. Captain Crozier is the captain of the USS Theodore Roosevelt, one of the largest aircraft carriers in our fleet. That ship carries a crew of 5,000. I might add that as of last night, 281 of those men had already tested positive for COVID-19, including, I might add, Captain Crozier. He was at Guam, far into the Pacific Ocean. He sent this letter in which he said he wants these men off the ship so that they can be tested and protected against the spread of the disease among these very, very close quarters that you have on a ship like that. And the letter went public. He was relieved of his command. The secretary, really the acting secretary of the Navy, then flew all the way out, flies halfway around the world to Guam from Washington to denounce Captain Crozier, to call him naive, to call him stupid. It was an incredible. I mean, again, you keep hearing me say on this program, we've never seen anything like this. Well, we never have seen anything like this. To denounce Captain Crozier in the most crude and foolish terms, and I think that they've essentially made Crozier into a hero. Now, I think that there are legitimate questions that one can ask about whether or not this letter should have been sent in the form that it was. But the fact is that what Captain Crozier wanted to do was to protect the health and the life, literally the lives of his sailors, of his crew. That's one of the reasons why the crew has been so supportive of Crozier, as well, of course, have many other naval personnel, retired, active, and so forth. But Trump has appointed people, including this acting secretary, an acting secretary who had no particular qualifications for this job. He had been a junior helicopter pilot, and his main qualification for becoming acting secretary of the Navy was that he provided a huge donation to President Trump's campaign in 2016. Well, the president said at one point, I'm hiring the best people. But in fact, he has done anything but hire the best people. And I think that this incident with Crozier is another good example of exactly that.
Did you notice at the press conference last night that Trump really did not want to criticize either Crozier or that other officer you just mentioned? Yep,
and the reason is that the public support for Crozier has been so general, has been so sudden. I think it's absolutely taken the president by surprise, and he is fearful, I think, of the political ramifications of further criticizing Crozer. So he said that I admire Crozer and so forth. But, the damage was done. And the fact of the matter is that, again and again, he has fired people, and I'm talking about fired absolutely top-notch personnel, like H.R. McMaster, who is the head of his National Security Council, certainly Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis, and many, many others, people who are he's fired his A team. He's fired his first team, and he's now staffed his administration with members of the third team, or maybe even of the fourth team. And, Brian, while we're talking about firing people, let me mention one other thing that happened just this past Friday. The president fired the Inspector General of the CIA, of our intelligence community, and he fired him because the Inspector General understood that he, the Inspector General, had a legal obligation to turn over information having to do with the Russian interference in the 2016 election. He wanted to turn it over to Congress. Now, he was doing his job. That's what Inspector Generals are supposed to do, are legally required to do. But needless to say, Trump is fearful of anything that might suggest that somehow Russian interference was, responsible for, or partly responsible for, his victory in 2016. And so he fired him, just like he fired Comey, just like he fired a lot of other people, anyone, including a number of the people who testified before the House Impeachment Committee last year. He fires anyone who is in any way critical of his own administration. Now, again, I think this tells you much more about the president than it tells you about the people that he's firing. But what I'm concerned about mostly in the firing of this fellow whose name is Atkinson, what I'm most concerned about is the degree to which no whistleblower, no inspector general, no whistleblower is going to come forth in the future, even when they should be coming forth to provide information that offers protection for our national security.
Gary, with that, we do have to leave, and I'm sorry to interrupt your last thought.
He's protecting himself instead of protecting our country.
Obligations, we do have to get going. Dr. Ostrower, as always, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me here.